Guys, I'm so excited to be here, to be in the UK, in Wales. I'm out of Chicago, so it's kind of like the immigrant station for Ireland, Italy, and Poland. So if you're from there, I probably know someone you're related to. So just a quick thing on myself, and we'll kind of dive in on probably for me the feature in Power BI that is the most distinct. And we'll kind of dive into it. So my name's Tommy Puglia. I'm located in Chicago in the grand old United States. I've been lucky enough to be a Microsoft MVP for the last 4 years. If you've heard other people say they're MVPs and you're interested in what that is, and you would want to actually join that and be a part of it, I encourage you, give a talk. Go to a user group, give a speech, even if you don't think you have anything exciting to talk about. It's honestly how most Microsoft MVPs started. Someone said you should give a session, you should do a talk. So it's probably one of the greatest honors I've been able to do. I also lead the Chicago Power BI user group. We meet downtown and virtually. So if you're probably flying to the States, you're probably flying to New York or Chicago. So join us. Just don't go in March. It's like this weather, but worse. Don't go in April because it's probably snowing, and May snows too. June or July, come to Chicago. If you enjoy this session but wish I spoke a lot less, there's a podcast out there with myself, Mike. If you want to, I'm going to make you stand. So yeah. So Mike Carlo, yeah. Me, Mike, and Seth, we do a podcast because this whole conference and everything online about Power BI, and the cool thing is how to do it. How do you do data flow? How do you do data model? And that's phenomenal. And sorry, I will call you back, wife. So, but there's a lot of gray area, and probably you've dealt with this too. It's like, okay, that's a really neat feature, but my organization doesn't care. Why is that? So our podcast really focuses on what we call the water cooler. And honestly, we don't know why and more people don't argue about a lot of the features in Power BI. Like, should you use custom visuals? How many visuals is appropriate on a page? Those are not set answers. So we talk every Tuesday and Thursday kind of really about those issues. And again, we argue, in all good fun, but we call it the water cooler and really focus on the why. Follow powerbi.tips on YouTube and LinkedIn, or you can find us on anywhere podcasts are available. So let's kind of really dive into what are we talking about today. And I love this conversation. I love this part of Power BI because it is by far the most single-handedly the most different feature than anything in Power BI. Everything but the scorecard feature in Power BI, you could go right after a session, go play on your computer, learn how to do a data flow, build it yourself as a developer. But scorecards and metrics follow a rapidly different mindset, and even though they're easy to set up, but it's a very different feature, and honestly, how it's actually successful in a team, in a department, in an organization. So let's do a quick background on what scorecards and metrics are. For a reference, who knows what the scorecards are? Metrics, or if you haven't listened in like 2 years, it was goals. So who's built one? Okay. Who uses them today? Perfect crowd. So it was a feature for those who are uninitiated. It's a feature released in 2021 by Microsoft, and it's probably gone through the most major updates outside of desktop in the last 12 months. If you follow the blog, if you kind of see where Microsoft's putting their money and their time, it's been in the scorecard feature. And what it actually allows you to do is connect to any data point in any of your reports and actually track it over time. So unlike a report where you already need the data available, whether it's manual data, Excel, or a database, I can actually connect to a data point in my data, in any of my reports, and actually have that tracked over time from the point that I create the scorecard. Why is this important? Well, it can actually align teams, users, and projects together in a way that a report really can't. It also allows for collaboration from the ability for users to actually check in. yes, there is a comment feature in Power BI. But in terms of actually tracking a particular data point over time to say, are we on track? That's where the scorecards really change. Also, who uses Power Automate? Okay, so this actually goes what I said. Half the people are Power Platform, and I bet the other half are more Azure. So, but that's a conversation we have on the podcast. So, for those who are using Power Automate, there's over 12 actions that you can use with the scorecard feature, and I believe over 7 triggers using scorecards alone in Power Automate. So the ability for you to actually track your data, communicate with users, and do that vice versa, to actually get data in to a scorecard outside of Power BI is what makes scorecards so powerful. So just a quick example looking at a scorecard here. And again, part of the fun today is you may look at this and go, this doesn't tell me anything. And that's kind of the point of the conversation today in terms of context. You're going to hear a few words repetitively from me. One of them is going to be context. The other is going to be measure what matters. But just a quick overview of what a scorecard looks like. You see I can have a main metric, my sales margin, my current sales margin over the last 3-month average. But what I can actually do is show my progress compared to a target. And you can see my progress is 128K. My target is 232, and I am behind. All of this is automated right now in Power BI. I didn't need to use Power Automate. I didn't need to do code. I didn't need to open up Tabular Editor, even though I always open up Tabular Editor. But all I had to do was simply open up Power BI in the browser, connect to a few data points, set up some automation to say if my target's below or my current value is below my target, say I'm behind. And now I can set up for each of these to give a context to all of the data in my reports. So a few of those components that we'll talk about. There's a current value. Where are we currently at compared to a target? These are going to be the most important features of the scorecard feature. That where are we currently at, by what data point, and again, I can connect to a bar chart, I can connect to a card, I can connect to a line chart. And the most important part of there is that context of compared to what? Are we on track? Are we above or below where we should be? What we can also set up are milestones or due dates. So compared to a report, what we can actually say is, well, for the year, we need to get to X, Y, and Z. Or we have milestones every quarter. And then what we can set up there are statuses to actually say we're behind, we're on track. I can create custom statuses to say when I'm 80% below my target, then at risk. Or if I'm 10% over, then we've met our goal. So this is part of the features that come already built in Power BI scorecards. I don't have to do anything custom. I don't have to set up or enable anything from a tenant level settings. This is already available for if you have a pro license, you can start doing this right away. But part of the fun too is that connecting. So what I'm actually connecting to is not necessarily creating a new report. I can actually connect to any report that I have access to in one scorecard. So unlike a dashboard, or actually unlike a report where it's one report, one data set, what I can actually do is have one scorecard that connects to reports across my workspaces. Also the automation, again, part of the power here is what it can actually do. If you have data that's outside of Power BI, God forbid, and you're trying to actually connect to that or show something, a marketing team has a campaign that doesn't have an API, they can actually use either a Power App or within Power BI itself and update the numbers themselves. So it doesn't have to necessarily live in a Power BI data set. So kind of the flow is, again, I can connect to Power Apps, SharePoint, anything in Power Automate, flow that into and update a scorecard. I can update the current value. I can update the target value. I can create a new metric. I can send an email out. And within Power BI scorecards, I can then flow that. I can flow that back to a database using Power Automate. I can flow that as a notification, send out approvals. Everything that you have access to that you would in Power Automate utilizes scorecards as a middle feature. And this is just the feature set. And again, maybe you knew about this, maybe you didn't, but part of the fun is just knowing how rich and how much Microsoft has updated and consistently improved the scorecard feature. Again, from where it came out in 2021 to where it is now is absolutely incredible. To me, it's the most underrated feature. Which brings us to why is that? If this feature is as rich in a rich experience as I'm saying it is, and if it has all these abilities, well, why isn't everybody using this? In my head, with all those features to connect and show the context of where we're at, well, everyone's hand should be up. No one should be at the session because they should already be using scorecards, but that's not the case. So we're going to dive into 3 areas on, I'm going to sell you on goals. I'm going to sell you on scorecards. And we're going to talk about first, why is there a lack of engagement? What is causing the lack of engagement? Why that is, and why haven't you got your department, your clients to actually start using them? And then how can we actually set it up for success? So why are we not talking about them more? Well, anyone can set up a scorecard. I think all of us are competent enough. If I can set up a scorecard, I know all you can. And it's pretty easy to connect to a data point, create a metric, create a status to say if we're behind, do this. But the problem is there's no context around that. And the problem is we don't know where it actually fits in terms of the ecosystem. Should we use this instead of a report? Should we use this instead of a dashboard? Should I use this instead of something embedding? And from a user point of view, just creating these metrics and just creating these target values can be confusing. So where does it actually fit and what is the actual purpose? Well, what it should be is it should be our true dashboard. And it really should take the place of what we consider a dashboard should be the scorecard feature. One of the things I loved was Steve Jobs, when he released the iPad, and this is important from the context point of view, he's given this, everyone knew he was going to release the iPad. The New York Times had an article about the tablet even before it came out. And during his keynote, he said, if we're going to add another product to our line, we have a phone, we have a computer. It has to do some things better than the other ones. If we're going to create another product, it has to be better at browsing the web than the phone. And it should be better at watching movies than the computer. If it doesn't do anything better, then it has no reason to be. And then he pulled out an iPad, and then showed everyone basically, and everyone knows the value of this if you use an iPad or a tablet, of how much better it is at certain features than a computer or than your phone. And in the same way, that's where scorecards really align. Is it supposed to take the place of a report? Absolutely not. Is it supposed to take a place of, let's say, just a normal dashboard? Well, depending on what you're using the dashboard for. But this goes all to why and what the scorecard's actually for. So it's not a magic cure. And this is one point I really want to stress. A lot of times, I think us in BI, we get a bad rap. Or at least the company sees us in a light of basically like we're the data dumpers. We're the data visualization people. I just need to show my data. And we don't really have a conversation when it comes to, well, what are you measuring? Well, what's important? What does success, how is success defined? We don't ask those questions. Or people, I'll rephrase that. People don't expect us to ask those questions on what is actually success. How many reports have you created in terms of for marketing? They're launching a new product or there's a new campaign coming out and they're telling you where the pain points are. Or they're just saying, we just need to show our numbers. We need to show our open rate. We need to show our success rate. But how often are they expecting us from a leadership point of view to go in to actually say, well, what's important? What does success, how do we define success? People don't think that's our place. I will gladly push back on that. Where as we're building our reports and as we're doing our scoping on reports, the purpose of a report, like what are we doing if we're just building, showcasing data? Part of the intelligence side of it is for us to help define success. So just building scorecards alone is not a magic cure. Just saying, hey, we're going to build a scorecard for you. You're going to see your numbers in a different way. Cool beans, everyone cool. Doesn't work that way. Because this also goes into your team, your business's data culture and the literacy. And I'll ask you guys something to think about. How well does your company or your clients, how well can they talk about the data? And I'm not saying that your marketing manager is creating complex stack calculations. How often is data part of the conversation on what they're doing? If they're launching a campaign, is it defined by the data? More importantly, can people argue with data? And again, not necessarily in a Power BI model, but how often is the conversation aligned with data, them understanding what's important to them? When I say, why is that campaign successful? Why is that product successful? Can they explain to me through data? And so this is part of the culture where honestly scorecards really fit in. And we have to plan with them. Again, everything else in Power BI I can run with. I can literally get off the stage today, go to another session, learn how to do an API with the data flow, and I can do that all by myself. Scorecards require stakeholder contribution, and it requires collaboration with your stakeholders and the teams. It requires them to also think about what success is defined by. This does not work without that conversation occurring. So what can we do in terms of creating those goals and at least setting ourselves up for success? This is not something that happens tomorrow. This is a conversation, this is a progress in terms of us getting from data culture where maybe there is no data culture, maybe you have a poor data culture or a blossoming one. How do we get to that, to something mature? And honestly, that's where scorecards can come in to actually be a proponent of building that data culture. So where do we start? And then we're going to talk about the OKR framework, which aligns perfectly with our scorecards. So some of the things, what can we do to at least start the conversation? And again, the conversation we want to have with our stakeholders is how are we defining success? We're building this report for you. We're spending all these hours building this data model. What does success look like? What actions are you taking from this report? Again, if there's no actions and that report's causing no decision making, what are we doing? Why are we spending the time here? So what we can do to begin to propel that conversation with stakeholders, start building pages and reports specifically to explain a scorecard. So again, we have the current and the target value. You may have a report because we're launching a new product. We're launching the new Giant Defy bike on April 1st. Okay, so that's what our report's about. That's what we're tasked with. No one's giving us a target number on how many bikes sold and by when. But let's create a scorecard. Let's create at least a target number. We know the number of bikes sold on average is X, Y, and Z. So we have a current and target value. Then have a report that at least begins to explain what that metric is showcasing. Why are we above? Why are we below? And then demonstrating that to stakeholders, saying, look, we have a neat way. I know you don't have a target value for the number of bikes or defies that you want to sell, but we want to at least showcase if you had something in mind, if you had an idea of what's important or the number that you're getting to, that we can showcase what's important. Utilize scorecards as your scoping reports. And this is one of the greatest tools that I've seen at least propel that conversation, where people go, hey, Tommy, Mike, I need a report. My report is for all of our bikes over the last 12 months. And we go, great. We can definitely do that for you. Now, that being said, there's a new feature in Power BI. It's really cool. I want to show it to you. And you don't have to be that salesy, but a little enthusiasm. But saying we're going to build a report, but we also want to incorporate this with the new feature. By the way, did you have any success metrics in terms of how many bikes you were planning to sell, or how many wheels or accessories that you wanted to do with this? Are there some dates that are important? And beginning to have that conversation where you're building the report and the scorecard together. This is part of that development phase. And again, the part of this is the contribution with the user, the contribution with the stakeholder. And this goes to aligning people with measure what matters. So who's heard of OKRs? Okay, so we'll do a quick demonstration. So this actually came from, I believe it was Intel. And there's an awesome book out there called Measure What Matters. I do not remember the author's name, but he was actually one of the venture capitalists that helped Google create their own OKR framework. The idea here is objectives and key results. So, and we'll do a quick kind of example of how this actually trickles in an organization. So, if I was the president of a soccer club, football club, let's say, and I believe that's appropriate. Let's say I was president of Liverpool, or Juventus. Let's say Liverpool, and I'm the president. What are my objectives? What's important to me? Well, it's probably two things. I probably have an objective to get butts in seats, and probably to actually be successful in the Premier League. Those are objectives. And I want you to notice, none of those are necessarily measurable by themselves. There's a common misconception, the word KPIs that we always hear, like, you gotta have your KPIs. Well, what are you indicating towards? And I think a lot of times we try to develop KPIs without an objective. So start at the objective. I'm the president of Liverpool. I have two objectives: get butts in seats, and then be successful in the Premier League. Okay, so let's do the exercise. As measured by what? How do we know that's successful? How do we know butts and seats are successful? Well, let's say 80% of home games should be filled. So that's one of key result. We are successful getting our attendance as measured by our 80% ticket rate. We are successful with being in the Premier League as measured by getting into the Europa League, finishing at least in 6th place. What should occur in a healthy data culture is those two key results then trickle down to the next manager, the next level of the hierarchy. If I'm the general manager of players, well, actually, I don't know what they call it in England. In baseball, and you see the Yankees here, the guy who signs players, they're called a general manager. What are they called here? General manager? Manager of players? The guy who's signing players. Or is that also the president? I don't know. So whoever that guy is, his objective is to get into the Europa League. That's his number one objective. So what would be his key results as measured by what? Obviously, it's going to be finishing in 6th place or above. But one of the things that you can look at in the stats is you need a healthy defense. You need a really good goalkeeper, maybe top 5 in the Premier League. So I need to finish. My key result of being successful in the Premier League is having one of the top 5 defenses in the league. So now I have a key result. I know I was successful as measured by the top 5 defense and having one of the top 5 scorers in the Premier League. Those two things should make my team successful. On the other side of the coin, take the exercise of the guy who's in charge of attendance. His goal is to get that 80% rate. So what does he need to do? Well, you'd probably think if you did the exercise, he probably wants pre-sales. He wants to get at least 80% of sales completed before the game starts. So his objectives is to have, let's say, tickets bought 2 weeks before games. So you can see how this trickle effect works. There's an objective. It's not necessarily measurable. It's not just more sales. It's actually something we're aiming towards. Again, think about this in an your actual examples. I'm a campaign manager. We're launching a new product. We want the product to be successful as measured by what? And part of what I think we need to do as BI professionals, business intelligence, if that's part of our name, is to foster this conversation. I can guarantee you there's 2 questions that will make your stakeholders sit up. If you ask them, what would cause you to get promoted and what would cause you to get fired? I wouldn't necessarily ask those questions, but I guarantee you there's extremes there. There's at least things that every stakeholder who's asking for a report that will keep them up at night about some of the data in your report. If something fell below 10% or if something rose above 200%, there are indexes that we can help foster. And I truly believe that's part of our role. As if we're going to do all this data, we're going to do all this modeling, we should help at least measure what matters. What's going to cause them to make a decision? And this should be part of our conversation. So I want to pause here before we do a demo, and hopefully the idea with the OKRs at least begins in terms of context. But I want to see if anyone had any questions. I don't see any questions there, but I want to see if anyone has any questions so far. We got a microphone coming.
We're looking at, well, I was showing these sort of targets to my group, and we were wondering about how visible it would be to our managers, or how that would work from a manager's point of view, being able to see the ones, the overview, I guess.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Basically, how visible can you make a scorecard depending on who's looking at it? This is another feature we didn't even talk about. The row level, or not row level security, but the security that I can do on a scorecard can go down to the metric level. I may have a scorecard that has, let's say, 25 metrics in it and then 10 sub-metrics. Well, I can actually define audiences based on those metrics to say, hey, metric 1, 2, and 5 need to be seen by these people. Metric 7, 8, and 9 need to be seen by this audience. One thing that Microsoft's rapidly developing is, and as part of their roadmap, is also called a hierarchy feature. So let's say you're like, I like the idea, but there's 200 sales reps, and they all have their numbers, and I'm not staying up tonight doing that. Well, they are developing a feature where you can actually create a hierarchy, and then basically it will rapidly develop everything underneath that. That's not out yet, but that's part of their roadmap. But basically, from a visibility point of view, you can create one scorecard and have rapidly different views based on who's using it. So let's kind of dive into at least creating it for those who never seen it before, and just how powerful it is, especially in the realm of just Power BI. So again, I'm in good old Power BI. And again, part that Power BI actually has is on the left-hand side, being able to see my metrics. I can either view this in an app. It doesn't have to necessarily be on the left-hand side. It can be in a workspace, an app, or individually shared. And what I actually have here, I have a few scorecards I want to look at. So just looking at the scorecard, what we actually have here is a few important items that we can actually set up. I have my sales margin current versus 3-month average. What I can actually do when I click into this is actually see some of the important items. I can see the progress, and also this is one of the things that me and Mike complained about for months, actually probably a year, is this is all well and good, but the target rapidly changes. What if I'm tracking something, again, over a rolling average? Or what if the milestone's constantly changing every month? I want to be able to track that. Well, in a scorecard, you can actually do that, whether it's automatic based on a data point, or I can manually set up those milestones to say, hey, we are on track or we're behind now, but in January 2023, we are actually above that target based on what that milestone was. But in terms of how easy it is to create one, and also the ability to use all the features in Power BI, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to edit this guy, and we're going to just create a new score metric here. We'll go down, we'll call it the SQL bits. It's not working? Cool. We'll see. Cool. Okay, well, we can't zoom in, so everyone squint. So 2023. And what I can actually do here from the current value, and let's see if I'm going to actually save this, and I'm going to bring this a little up so everyone doesn't have to necessarily see. Actually, why don't we start with a new scorecard so it's not everyone looking at the very bottoms. So we'll call this SQL bits. Now, I can set up margin, but now with the current value, what you can actually see is it does not have to be connected to Power BI. What I can also do here is now that the scorecard's created, I can automatically find this in Power Automate. So again, if I don't have data that's in Power BI, I can actually update this scorecard based on any other data point or manually. I can make this a manual number that the marketing team is required to check in. They're doing this big bike promotion sale, and they're required to check in on how many emails they sent out or how many doors they went to. And they can actually go here and update the scorecard. So we'll create this manual one. We'll just say the target's 10, and we'll say check-ins. So what a user can do here is actually, once it's already published and shared with appropriate users, outside of just Power BI, we can actually create a check-in and update the value here. So from an accountability point of view, we can say, hey, your marketing team, you want to actually track what the effort is and what progress we're at. Well, you have to check into Power BI, or we'll build a Power App for you, or we can create some automation for you. But you have to check in to see where we're at. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in Power BI. And we can say, okay, our number's 5. We've saved. And we can actually see exactly where we're at. So just some basic numbers here. And again, simple as any user that you give the appropriate access to can now check in. So part of this too, again, is not just the reporting tool, not just the consumer tool. This is part of the collaboration that we're talking about. Everyone on a marketing team has something they're responsible for. Everyone here probably, and I want to stress this one last time, but all of us here have something. If we were to do really well, we're going to get promoted. We're going to move far. But if we were to stop working or do something very poorly, maybe inaccurate numbers, it's going to cause a decrease. We all have those pain points. And everyone from marketing to products to sales has those pain points. Creating the scorecard for one place to check in, and especially for those who are a little, we'll call them data adverse, where if you show them a scorecard, they run away in fright and horror. And we all know those people where we have to be very cautious on what we show them in a report. And sometimes we have to show all the colors in gray because it can be a lot. So just having one place to show what's important. But I do have a few reports that actually are important here for this particular scorecard. So why don't we actually create that? So let's create a scorecard here, and we'll call this our sales margin. And we'll say the current versus 2-month average. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up here, and I'm actually going to connect to data. We'll choose my EventureWorks report. And what this actually brings up is my normal report. But here's the really cool part. It's not static. So anything that you could normally do, let's say if you've ever used personal bookmarks, are available in the scorecard feature. So quick background on this report. Because I love Italy and I love bikes, that's what this report's about. But everything is updated and adapted based on the filter on the top left. So, excuse me, our sales margin, our products with profit, everything is dependent on the filter on the top left. That's showing me how many months average we're looking at. So for the current value, what I want to do is obviously 1. Set that to 1. And what we'll do is we'll choose our first product with profits. We'll take any tooltip as well. So it's not just necessarily one data point that's on the report. What I'm actually going to choose here is my sales margin rolling average. And since I chose 1 month, that's what we're looking at. But again, I can choose anything that's available in the visual and from a tooltip. If I wanted to say period over period, I can choose what that number is. But in this case, let's just do a rolling average. And we'll say, now, when I do a line chart, what's really cool is when I create this data, when I create this scorecard, and I create this metric, but what Power BI is going to do is start tracking this as a data set on the cycle that I say. And I can say daily, weekly, monthly, I believe biweekly, quarterly, and it will actually create a row in a data set that I can connect to and do other things with. Once I start tracking this based on what I selected. Excuse me 1 second, we're going to get some water. So, and it's also telling me what's filtering. We'll say, good, we're going to connect. What we can do here, we can do some more formatting. Yes. Oh, so I thought the Italian thing, okay, yes, that works. So, everyone can hear me okay? Apologize for the cough. So let's do our target. Again, we're working with the team. They don't have their target numbers. They haven't really defined that. So why don't we do it for them? What we're going to do is we're going to connect to the same report, but I'm just going to adjust the filters. We'll say set up. We'll connect to data. Same report. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the filter to say I want to actually see a 3-month rolling average. Choose the data point here, and I can see everything is adjusted based on what I selected. And now we can actually see we have both numbers set up. Now what I can finally do here, and again, the important part here is now that I've connected to these data points, as long as that report refreshes, it's going to add a data set and add those points to a series and to a data model. If you don't believe me, create a scorecard and then try to connect to a live connection in Power BI desktop. You'll find this and it will act as a data set. Now we can set up our rules. And again, we can make the rules manual or we can make them automatic. So what we're going to do here, we're going to do some basic things. We're going to say when the value is greater than, and we'll say percent of the target, 100%. We're obviously on track. But if we are below 80% of the target, we're at risk. And finally, we're behind. Below. Is that what I did? Nope. Yeah. Well, 80%. Yep. Okay. We're good. So because I also chose a line chart, Power BI knows not just if I compare to picking a card. Thank you. Is it tea? Okay, thank you. We'll see. I feel much better. Thanks. So, but it'll actually try and point all the data points in that series, and I can actually see this. If I connect to a card, there'd be 1 point. But again, as things progress, the data points are going to update. For example, looking at my product margin here, that's a line chart. Let's choose our products with profit. So this is actually something I've been tracking since metrics have come out. I have not touched this scorecard at all. I created this and because I knew I would be doing a demo in SQL Bits 2 years later. Not really, but actually everything here has been tracked since I created this scorecard. This was a card. This was not a line chart. This is not in a sense historical already in the data set. This is based on the filters that I applied and it's tracking all that over time. And I can actually zoom in here if I want to see actually how we're doing. We see we've been kind of trending a bit below. And maybe I would want to check out how we're doing. In the same way here, I created this scorecard or this metric in September. And everything here, the current and the target value, have been able to track since then. So let's create another scorecard, but let's make it a little more in depth because, again, maybe our reports aren't well developed for the numbers that they're looking at. I know the guy who's in charge of bikes. He does all the bike sales, and we've had some conversations on really what success looks like for him. So do I need to create a bike report for him so I can show the scorecard? Absolutely not. Let's create a new metric. We're going to show the products with profits for bikes. And we'll connect the data in the same way. And again, this is part of the really cool feature in terms of easily showcasing something. I have bikes here, and it has the hierarchy. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to drill down. And guess what? Everything here is now filtered based on what I selected. And I'm going to choose bikes here. But again, I want to show the percentage of bikes with profit. So again, do I have to create a whole new report and do that explanation? Absolutely not. I have my tooltips of the number of road bikes that are the rolling months of 12 right now, so I want to adjust that. But it knows the context and the filter context based on what I selected. And when I connect to this scorecard, it's going to remember that context, add that to the data set. And we'll say it's at 81%. The bike manager told me that we need to be above 84% on a 3-month average. That's what's important to him. So let's do a final adjustments here. Let's do a 2-month average. We'll see where we're at. Okay, we're above. We'll say connect. We'll do our final target. We'll say our percentage is 85. We can set up the rules here. Greater than or behind. I can also make those statuses custom. So now that I actually have that set up, And again, just to showcase something for a user, to say, look, we know that you told me, even if your company doesn't have that OKR framework, there's probably an index of what they're trying to look for. Say, is it 85%? Okay, well, as of right now, the product's profit's 85%. If he wants to learn more about why that number is the way it is, what he can actually do is click on the Power little bar chart icon, and Power BI is going to know the context and then explain basically exactly where we're at. We're looking at road bikes. This is the visual where it came from. So in terms of creating quick scorecards, even if you don't have a whole data culture set up, even if you don't have the entire framework set up, we can actually begin to create reports that help explain, create that dashboard, and we say, okay, our road bikes. Some things I would do here, I would probably do a drill. I can do a drill through. I show what bikes those are, what those products, the SKUs are. That can be my explanation page. And that's exactly how we're going to set up the scorecard. And just like that, without any context, we're able to create just a basic scorecard. And again, I can adjust everything. If you have personalized visual on, I can adjust everything here and then connect to that particular data point. So let's kind of dive in. I know we're getting near time. So a few quick things. What actually works best with scorecards? If you're going to start using this today or working with your stakeholders, the biggest things that work are percentages or anything that has percentage difference. Generally speaking, if you're doing sales year to date and you're tracking towards a total number, that's a little more difficult for it to use unless you're doing something like forecasting to say where we're expected to be at the end of the year. Something that, again, can change over a target number. The harder ones are the ones where you're starting off a base value and you're tracking towards something way in the future. Those don't seem to work very well. But what I've actually seen that work on some of the projects that I've been able to do are anything that you can say is percentage based, period over period, percentage to target, percentage over target. And again, anything that's actionable, anything that you can say the context. It does not have to span, and nor should it span over a year, usually your metrics. It should be something where maybe it is for a particular campaign, it's for a particular launch, it's for a particular time period. Again, those trending towards yearly goals, anything that's non-moving, those generally do not work. Finally, the last thing we want to do is we can set this up with the automation. What I can now finally do with that scorecard we created, that products with profit, if that falls below 85%, I can send an email to those bike managers. I can even then connect to the data set, kind of filter that out to say who's in charge of road bikes and send the notification of what bikes those are. Send the filter, a report that's already filtered. Or I use everything else in Power Automate to send them what bikes are actually not causing profit. I can set this all up in 20 minutes. And again, the last thing is part of this is our job to be in to teach, and I think our job to have a more leadership role when we're working with reports. Help people define what matters to them. Help guide people towards, again, measuring what matters. So that is everything that I have. I know we're near time. We're at 10 minutes. So I want to thank you guys so much. Again, there's so much here. I really hope that you guys at least begin to discover not just the feature itself, the tool itself, but the idea behind it, and take that empowered role at your organization or in your team to say, let's define what matters. Let's measure what does success look like. And from there, scorecards, you'll really see the fruit of it. So at this point, we'll take some questions. I'll cough one last time, but thank you guys so much.
Is it working? Yeah. I'm just going to go first. I tried sending the question to the screen, but I don't think it's working. Okay. There was a question about, does it work with Azure Analysis Services data sets?
Yeah. If it connects to, depending if you're doing a direct connection, but if you can use it in Power Automate, you can then update and do everything that you want to do. Current, target, update, add a check-in into a scorecard. So if you can connect to it in Power Automate, you can query in Power Automate, you can use this in the scorecard feature.
So 2 questions from me, if that's okay. What would happen if someone were to make a change to a visual that you've tied an OKR to, either delete it or amend it or something like that. And then the second one is, I think that there's like OKR functionality within the Office, online type stuff. What is there any crossover or interaction?
The two questions is, what if someone were to update that bar chart with the bikes and update the data? Well, the good news is Microsoft's not going to let you know. So, so you'll just start seeing it'll look like someone, flatlined. Generally speaking, it won't error out. It just won't necessarily work. So that's the one thing. But that's if a major change. Again, if you had the same data in a visual and the same tooltips, it's going to work the same. If there's a major update. And then the last question is, how does this tie in with Microsoft Office? That's a great question because Microsoft is all on the OKR framework. They actually, who's heard of Viva Goals? So this is actually, Microsoft was so gung-ho about Viva Goals, and I think this goes into, honestly, why the session today was more about the philosophy was Viva Goals came out August of last year. And for 4 months leading up to it, they had a PDF that was 165 pages. Had nothing to do with Viva Goals, but everything to do with the OKR framework. And I think that just goes to show that, so you can use this with the Viva Goals. You can use this across. I think you can actually connect to Viva Goals because it works basically the same and enter and point to a Power BI report. But I think Microsoft realized early on too, listen, Viva Goals and metrics and scorecards, they don't work unless people have this idea of an objective and what defines success. So, but yeah, it's going to be more integrated. They're really pushing Viva Goals from a company-wide point of view if you don't have Power BI. Oh.
Can you pass this to the gentleman?
Thanks for that. See, when you are creating your goals, do you need build access to the data points?
No.
Or do the standard read access
So,
work?
and that's a really cool one too. If you have a data champions at your company, if you have people who, so the question was, do you need build access to point or connect to a report when you're creating a scorecard? That's actually one of the cool things is if I just can consume the report and I can access the report, I can connect to those data points in the scorecard. So I don't need to be a developer. So if you want to actually empower your marketing managers because they love the idea of it and they want to create their own scorecards, a few trainings and they can be off and running. I'm sorry. RLS? So the question was, can you apply row-level security to the scorecard? So right now, again, it's based on audiences. It's not necessarily the row-level security. That is one of the limitations right now in terms of if your data set had row-level security, how does that work in the scorecard? And that's one of the things that they are, I believe that's also one of the main items on the roadmap, on that integration.
We have another one from an online attendee. If I have a metric with 50 sub-metrics, do I need to create them one by one, or can I mass upload them initially?
So as of right now, so the question was, if I have a metric, and again, part of what I could have done with that bikes products with profit, I could have had the road bikes, and then I could have had each individual bike as a sub-metric that rolls up. So because we probably didn't even go through half the features from the scorecard feature. One of the things I could also do is I can create a metric. Let's say I had total profit and the 4 metrics below it, 4 sub-metrics that are the 4 products for the road bikes. What I can actually do is roll up that total metric. So the volume of my main metric is basically the summarization of each of the sub-ones. Now the question is, do I have to create each one individually? And again, right now, without that hierarchy feature, yes. So again, if you have 200 sales reps, grab a cup of coffee, grab a Guinness, and you're going to sit down for a bit. So, or the API, or yeah. Well, we said or if you want to do the API, you can use the API. And good luck with that. So, but yeah.
I've been warned to be careful not to change any of
Yeah.
the real data.
So yeah.
Extract from it, but I don't want to change.
So the question is, if you have the data from Azure and you want to read only, is that there an issue there? So the question is, as long as it's in Power BI, you won't actually affect the source data. So So we're at time. Guys, don't want to take you. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of the conference.